Welcome to Fireside Gaming. I'm Billum, and our retro gaming journey this time around brings us back to the Metroid series with a look at Metroid Fusion for the GameBoy Advance. Metroid Fusion is an interesting game as it came after the series went through a bit of a drought. As you'll remember from my Super Metroid review, the previous game came out on the Super Nintendo. That means Metroid fans went through the entire N64 and Game Boy Color generation without seeing a new game. It wouldn't be until 8 years later when Metroid Fusion was released on the GBA that the series was revived. That came alongside the release of Metroid Prime for the GameCube, a shiny new 3D first-person shooter that brought major changes to the series. But we can talk about that another time. For now, let's just stick to the 2D Metroid games. So with the return of Samus Aran, we see the best bounty hunter in the galaxy suit up again for another job. This time around, she's assisting a group of researchers from the Biologic Space Laboratories. They're exploring SR-388, which is the same planet that Samus went to destroy all the Metroids in Metroid 2 on the orders of the Federation. Unfortunately for Samus, the trip doesn't last long before she's assaulted by a new, strange enemy. While at first it appears that this attack does nothing, that's far from the case. Samus passes out after escorting the researchers back to the BSL station and crashes into an asteroid field. Luckily, the BSL crew recovered her after the crash and sent her to the Federation for medical care. It turns out that gelatinous enemy Samus fought is called an X-parasite. It's an organism that infects and consumes the host, gaining their abilities and knowledge. It's not looking good for Samus, but then a researcher steps forward with a new vaccine created from Metroid DNA. And not just any Metroid DNA, but the same baby Metroid that she saved during her last adventure. As for where the X-parasite came from, it turns out the Metroids on SR-388 were predators of the X-parasite. With their destruction, there's been nothing to stop the X from multiplying. The Metroid vaccine is given to Samus and she recovers, but not without some problems. First off, the scientist had to surgically remove large portions of Samus's armor due to it fusing to her body during the X infection. This has left her significantly less powerful as she's missing her gear from prior adventures. Also, the Metroid DNA has an unfortunate side effect of making Samus weak to cold, just like the Metroids. After Samus recovers from her surgery, she's sent back to the BSL station to investigate an explosion. It's here that she learns the X-parasites have broken free and are spreading throughout the station. This has her working alongside an artificial intelligence on her new ship, which she nicknames Adam, after her old commanding officer, to stop the spread of these X-parasites. She's capable of doing so as her Metroid DNA now allows her to absorb the X-parasites, since they were predators of the X. While doing this, Samus learns that the explosion was caused by an X-parasite mimicking her. It's made up of the parts of her Chozo suit that were surgically removed, which were sent to the BSL station for containment. That means there's a fully powered Samus Aran clone, called the Saw X, stalking around the station. Considering Samus is nowhere close to full power, Adam advises her to avoid conflict with the creature. Along the way, Samus also runs into the creatures from Super Metroid that taught her how to wall jump and shine spark. She sets them free and they find their way to her ship, keeping them safe from the X-parasites. While Samus does her best to contain the X-parasites, they continue to spread to various different parts of the BSL station. This eventually results in Samus discovering a secret laboratory hidden on the floating research center. The Federation have been using this lab to breed Metroids. The Saw X is also here and has set off the self-destruct sequence for the facility. Samus escapes the lab before it is jettisoned from the BSL station and explodes. After this, the AI tells Samus all about the Federation's plans to breed more Metroids. It also lets her know that the Saw X didn't die during the explosion. Well, that one did, but there's more on the station. The X-parasites reproduce asexually, and there are now at least 10 of them prowling around the facility. This has Samus being ordered to escape the station by the AI and leave it to the Federation to clean up this mess. Samus disagrees, claiming that the Federation won't be able to handle the X-parasites, and saying she intends to self-destruct the BSL station. In her anger, she accidentally calls the AI Adam, which elicits a response. The AI asks about her old CO and what he would do in such a situation. Samus tells the AI that Adam would understand the need for sacrifice. After some deliberations, the AI agrees, but tells Samus to first change the course of the BLS station to send it towards SR-388. This will cause the explosion to also take out the planet, meaning the Federation can't go to it to capture more X-parasites for their research. With this, Samus makes her way to the main control station of the BLS station, but before she can change its orbit, the Saw X shows up to stop her. Samus defeats the creature and it undergoes a transformation, taking on a much more horrid form than before. After its defeat, the Saw X flees before Samus can absorb its DNA. With no time to spare, Samus changes the BSL station's orbit and arms the self-destruct sequence. Now she has only a few minutes to make it back to her ship and escape the research facility. But it's never that simple. When Samus enters the hangar, she finds her ship gone and an Omega Metroid occupying the area. Samus does battle with the Omega Metroid, but can't properly fight it without her Ice Beam. Before she's killed, the Saw X appears one more time. It attempts to defeat the Omega Metroid, but is taken out and reverts to its X form. This allows Samus to absorb the Saw X's DNA, which gives her access to the Ice Beam once again. With her suit back to full power, Samus desperately blasts away at the Omega Metroid as she tries to defeat it before the BLS station self-destructs. Our heroine is successful and she escapes from the station with the help of the same creatures she saved earlier. SR-388 is destroyed alongside the BLS station, and the threat of the X-Parasite is no more. It's also at this time that Samus learns that the deceased Federation leaders have their minds backed up as AI. The one working with her is Adam, her former CO. Samus closes out the adventure wondering how her and Adam's actions will be interpreted by the Federation. They went against the government's orders in destroying the X-Parasites. The idea of tribunals and investigations angers Samus, but Adam tells her it will be okay. He assures her one of them will understand why they did what they did. Samus agrees, stating that the human soul will ever reach for the truth. And that concludes the story of Metroid Fusion. I have some mixed feelings about the narrative this time around. As I already said in my Super Metroid review, I prefer the minimalist style of storytelling the series is known for. However, I also understand that the story being told this time around is a bit more complex, so I get that they'd want to change the presentation style. I also have some minor issues with the story. For example, the DNA for the Metroid vaccine comes from the baby Metroid in Super, but that doesn't make much sense to me. After all, Super starts with Samus dropping off the baby Metroid and then being immediately recalled back to the research station after Ridley shows up to steal it. Those scientists were evidently dang fast considering the short period of time the baby Metroid was in their care. Personally, I'm under the impression that the DNA actually came from one of the swarm of freaking Metroids being bred at the BSL station. But the Federation said it was from the baby Metroid, so Samus wouldn't grow suspicious of where they got new Metroid DNA from. To be clear, that's not stated in the game anywhere, but it makes more sense to me considering the events of Fusion and the timeline of Super Metroid. Also, Adam's importance in this game doesn't jive with me. He's never mentioned in any game prior to this, and just kinda shows up out of nowhere. It seems like the writers were hoping for a big emotional payoff that the AI is him, but I never even met the guy when he was alive, so why would I care? We do get a proper look at Adam and Samus' relationship in the Metroid prequel manga, but I have to stress that this didn't come out until a year after Metroid Fusion and never got an official release outside of Japan. I just can't help but think introducing Adam in Fusion was a case of putting the cart before the horse. Moving on to Samus, I can't deny that giving her a voice does allow her to be more fleshed out than if she just remained as a silent protagonist. At the same time, this does cause a slight disconnect between her and the player as they might not always share the same feelings throughout the game. But if there's one feeling Metroid Fusion does successfully invoke, it's dread. Yes, I know, we're a game early, but trust me on this. There is nothing more terrifying than hearing the Saw X slowly walk around through areas while you hide away and hope it doesn't find you. The atmosphere the game creates at these moments is immaculate, and I can't praise them enough. Since we've already been covering departures from the typical Metroid formula, let's go ahead and talk about the gameplay. Metroid Fusion nixes much of the freedom of exploration found in the 3 previous 2D games. Instead, the BSL station is broken up into different environments that mimic the habitats of SR-388. A security door system to contain the X-Parasites keeps players from checking these areas out earlier than expected, which makes sequence breaking almost non-existent. This is something I'm torn on, yet again. It makes sense why the progress in the game is handled this way when tied to the story, but I do still wish there was a bit more agency for the player. It makes me see Metroid Fusion as less of a Metroidvania game and more as a 2D action shooter. And I feel like if you go into the game with that mindset, it's a lot of fun. I did so this time around, and it resulted in me blasting through the game in about 2.5 hours. Granted, this is also my 5th or 6th time playing it. I also didn't go crazy searching for extra items, with my collection percentage only sitting slightly above 50%. One aspect of the gameplay that really benefits this approach is the controls. Metroid Fusion offers incredibly tight controls that allow players to breeze through areas while blasting away at enemies. Jumping is snappy, and Samus can quickly ascend areas thanks to the addition of the ledge grab in this game. I've only got a few minor complaints about the gameplay in Metroid Fusion. The first would be the lack of a dedicated button for shooting at a downward angle. Instead, players hold the L shoulder button and then press down to do this. Super Metroid puts the angle shots up and down on the left and right shoulder buttons. And I understand why Fusion can't do this, since it's working with less buttons as it came out on the GBA. I also have to mention that the R shoulder button now switches Samus to missiles. It also activates power bombs once those have been obtained. Yet again, this is a change I'm split on. Super Metroid using the select button to switch between items was a bit cumbersome, but I almost wonder if that wouldn't have been a better option for Metroid Fusion. After all, the extra items, such as the grapple beam and X-ray visor, are non-existent in this game. While I'm on that note, the lack of grapple beam and X-ray visor really shows just how much less focused Metroid Fusion is on exploration. But let's get back to talking about item changing. Once players upgrade from normal to ice missiles, all missiles are ice missiles. That means that there's only beam and missiles to change between, which cuts out the cumbersome navigation that the select button brought to Super Metroid. Plus, the only use of select in Metroid Fusion is waking the GBA up from sleep mode, which is a feature I completely forgot about. Either way, this really isn't a major complaint, and I'm confident Nintendo made the right choice by putting missiles on R, especially considering how fast-paced the game is and the need to switch between beam and missiles while moving. I'm more of just wondering out loud if another option could have worked better. You've probably already noticed, but Metroid Fusion is a dang good looking game. The sprites really pop even on a GBA, and I really like its overall appearance. The colors are a bit on the brighter side, but that's common on GBA games to overcome the screen not having a backlight. My only complaint is that Samus's fusion suit kind of looks like a jumble of pixels sometimes. It's better depending on the color of the suit she has, and I love its look during the portraits. It's just in-game that it looks like a bit of a mess to me. And of course, I can't talk about Metroid Fusion without discussing its audio. The game proves to be another shining example of how music and sound effects can come together to create a specific atmosphere. I have already talked about this some with the Saw X, but the game does this all throughout with its different themes for areas as well as the tracks that play during climactic moments. Overall, Metroid Fusion is an incredibly good game. While I can understand the changes to the presentation and level design not being welcomed by some veteran Metroid fans, it still does what it sets out to do well. And looking at it through the lens of an action game helps immensely when understanding the game's true potential. I highly recommend checking the game out if you're one of the players that jumped in with Metroid Dread. Now, if only Nintendo would make it available on modern consoles. The Wii U eShop is closing down next year, which will lock many players off from experiencing this game. I hope they'll add it to Nintendo Online at least, but one would think that would have happened before the release of Metroid Dread. I don't know, sometimes Nintendo just feels so backwards with how they handle re-releases. While this ends our look at the retro 2D Metroid games, there's still Dread that needs to be covered. I haven't played it yet as I wanted to hold off and review it for the channel, so I'll be doing that in the future. I can't say when that will be for sure, but keep an eye out for it. Thanks for stopping by and watching my review of Metroid Fusion. I'm appreciative of any likes, comments, or subscriptions. Also, I've got a wealth of retro reviews you're more than welcome to check out if you haven't already. And as always, take it easy.